Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's the biggest stage I've ever presented on. I'm very excited. Today I'm going to talk about simplifying pipelines, simplifying adoption of pipelines through portals. Before I start, I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and the company I work for. My name's John Byron. I'm a technologist and a developer focused on CI/CD and developer enablement, really just trying to get our developers into production as quickly as possible. I work for Liberty Mutual Insurance. We're a global enterprise headquartered in Boston. Very big company. We're over 50,000 employees at this point, the third largest property and casualty insurer in the US, and 68th on the Fortune 100. I work for the Global Retail Markets US division. We do auto, home, life. I'm hoping some of you guys are customers. Actually, we certainly have greater than 1,000 IT employees. We actually have about 2,000, 2,500 users, somewhere in there. Before I go, if anybody has any questions during the presentation, just raise your hand. I prefer to get questions as I go. That way they're a little bit more relevant. You remember them, stuff like that. So please feel free to ask me a question at any point. It's really bright. I'll try to see hands. There we go. So before I go into what we have now, I want to talk a little bit about the journey, where we came from, what our original goal was, and how it worked out. So the first step, we needed a repeatable process. The idea being we wanted to get people to build their software and get it out into production in a repeatable fashion. That shouldn't sound, mystifying. It's kind of the goal of automation. Had to be automated. We didn't have to have anybody building in their IDEs or anything like that, anybody running shell scripts. Everything had to happen through some kind of automation process. Easy to use. We didn't want to hit 35 buttons. We at least only wanted to hit 1 or 2 to make things happen. So had to be easy to use, and then had to be fully compliant. I work for an insurance company where we have a lot of regulations. We do a lot of audits. So we had to make sure that we could service those audits when they came in. We had to make sure that we were auditable. So after years of iteration on all this, we came up with a process, and we called it the glide plane. A great name. The glide plane was a schedule of how you're going to get your stuff into production. You had to hit certain goals. You had to hit certain timelines to make sure you could make a monthly release. So I'll just give you an example. So I'm a developer. I've got a great idea. It's going to make money for the company. It's really going to help our user base. I want to get it into production. So what's the process I would have to go through? First thing I got to do, I got to get my infrastructure. I'm going to have to land somewhere. So I put in a request for that. So I have to fill out at least one form, maybe 2 or 3, depending on how many environments I need. I'm going to have to schedule some meetings, talk with some people, make sure I get what I need for that thing to run. This is a process we did streamline a little bit over time, but it was still pretty lengthy just to get the boxes. Next, I got to submit a request for the pipeline. Our pipelines were very locked down. We didn't allow users to create new jobs. They couldn't update their process. They had to actually talk to my team to even be able to create a build job at all. And then next, the developer actually gets to do their job. They dev, they build, they test. They do that over and over again. Of course, they had to do all that on a schedule. Let's say they wanted to get a build out to QA tonight. They didn't quite get it in time. Well, looks like they're waiting till tomorrow. So any delays at all can cost days. Next are config changes. Obviously, we're not going to have the same configuration in dev as we do in production. Different endpoints, different databases, stuff like that. So we had to manually get those set up in each environment. Again, forms, meetings, takes a long time, very iterative, make sure we get it right. And then, of course, we had to open change tickets. Again, we're back to compliance. We need to make sure we're tracking the changes that are happening in production. So we have to open a change ticket, list everything that's going to happen, list a backup plan, the whole 9 yards, get that thing approved. And then finally, we could submit a request for deploy. A little counterintuitive, but believe it or not, the change ticket isn't actually a request to deploy. It's just saying I'm going to do a deploy. So now we have to set up a request for the deploy. So now that's another ticket to a wholly different team to actually do the deploy on a certain release date. Of course, this is a monthly release date. All right, so they submit the request, might have to talk about it a little bit with that team, and then often they'll have to be on a bridge line on 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning to actually get that into production. Not a ton of fun. So a lot of steps, a lot of manual steps. That entire process, 2 to 3 months. So I have an idea right now, it's probably going to be December, maybe November if I'm lucky before I actually see that in production. That is not good. 2 to 3 months, very, very slow. So we ended up with roadblocks with all our meetings and all our intakes and all our forms and our wait time and our schedules. It was not good. The good thing was it was compliant. That was really the main goal. It had to be compliant. It had to be auditable. But it was way too slow. So we went back to the drawing board. And we had a lot of things that we still needed to do. We still needed to make it compliant. It is still our biggest concern. We had to automate all the processes. Earlier I said we had to automate, but we're only talking about build and deploy processes. We needed to automate all our processes. We had to make sure that we could do infrastructure, that we can do config. Everything had to happen at least at the touch of a button if it didn't happen automatically. And we wanted to enhance our extendability. Remember earlier I talked about putting together a build pipeline. You had to talk to my team and we would put it in place for you. It was a very static process. It was hard to extend. We expected the developer to conform to our process in order for it to work. We wanted to be able to add new technologies, add new build processes easily without really having to work really, really hard to get it done. We also wanted to increase innovation. When we're locking these developers into a very specific pipeline setup, very specific technologies, they don't have the chance to innovate, okay? They spend so much time just getting things into our process that they're not taking the time to actually improve their software. They just really want to just get their stuff out there. And then we wanted to enable developer control. With all this stuff that we were doing, the developers had no control whatsoever. They really couldn't see how the build process worked. They couldn't see how the deploy process worked. Essentially, they checked in their code and stuff just happened. Eventually, their application showed up in production. That's not so good. We wanted to give them the opportunity to enhance the process. And then, once again, we wanted to reduce time to market. 2 to 3 months is not good. It's a really quick industry now. We've got a lot of online competitors that are doing a lot of cool stuff, and they're getting their stuff out quick, and we had to start adjusting to make that happen. So what we did is we created a whole new platform. I love this slide. We called it the Fusion platform. And what this really is, this is a from code to production platform that allows developers to get out into prod really, really fast. Okay, they just go through a quick request process. They're given a build job, they're given a Jenkins file, and essentially they control the entire process. This whole presentation isn't about Fusion, but I'm going to pump it a little bit because it's pretty good. We developed this with a really small team. About a dozen people put this together. It's the process deploys on Docker out into AWS. It took us about 3 months to get it actually deploying out into a non-prod, and about 6 to get it into production in a fully compliant manner. Of course, we have Jenkins as the orchestrator. It does all the heavy lifting underneath. It keeps, it instruments the pipelines and makes everything happen. It's pretty complex. We have about 25 different applications underneath the covers that make everything work. Some of them are internally developed applications. A lot of them are vendor apps and stuff like that. So it's a process that happens underneath the covers. So we have this complex process, and we needed a way to get developers in easily. They're not used to having to do anything to get their pipelines working except for filling out forms and then waiting for somebody else to do the work. So we created the Fusion portal, which is really what we're here to talk about. It's the entryway to the Fusion platform. This is how developers use our platform. And it's got a bunch of great features. It's got an easy UI, supports multiple technologies. It handles configuration in an automated fashion. It gives the developers a lot of control over how their pipelines run and how their applications get out into prod. It's API enabled, so it's got a back end backed by several different microservices that allow a bunch of different stuff to happen. And then there's no roadblocks. So I'm going to talk through these in depth. So the easy UI. This is a Java-based GUI. It's just a wizard-based process. A user comes in and they see this banner. And they just hit get started. And it works them through. It asks them a bunch of questions. What application technology are you using? Are you using Node? Are you using Java? Are you using WAS-LP? Stuff like that. And it runs them through. How do I build your application? Where are your artifacts going to end up when it's done? And it just runs them right through. We've got little help bubbles as it goes to, if they don't understand the question, just click on the little question mark and it'll tell them what we're actually asking. Look at that, I covered that bullet in advance. Drop downs. So, one of the biggest problems when you're filling out a form, fat fingering. There's a lot of drop downs in there that only will allow the user to choose what they can choose. So let's say they have a new application, they have all the code. They need to obviously tell us what repo they want the Jenkins file to land in. So what happens is we have drop downs, and it only displays the projects, the Bitbucket projects, and the repos that they have access to write to. That way they can't update my Jenkins file in my application by accident. They can only update stuff they have access to. And before they hit go, they do have the ability to read through everything they just entered. This is, believe it or not, I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but our first iteration didn't allow them to do that. Which really was a pain. So we had a lot of times the process would fail because they fat-fingered something. And so, they get to review it all before they hit go. And then when it's done, it gives them a link to the job. It gives them a link to the Jenkins file so they know exactly where to go. They can see where their pipelines are going to run. They can see the Jenkins file that was created for them. So, multiple technologies. I talked earlier about not being able to support new stuff very well. We had a lot of WAS-ND, a lot of WAS-BPM. If you guys know about those, they can be a little bit of a complex build process, especially the BPM one. So we wanted to be able to support a bunch of different technologies. So right now, this is probably not even a complete list. I haven't been at my desk for a week. For all I know, they added one while I was gone. So Node, Ruby, Python, Java, WAS-LP, doesn't really matter. We're only limited here really by the base images that we have available to the users. Creating base images doesn't take very long. We get a request in, hey, I want to deploy Golang or something like that. We can usually have it up in a day or so. We also do infrastructure pipelines. So like I mentioned, we're in AWS. Somebody needs a new RDS instance. They need a new S3 bucket, a new EC2, something like that. We have that ability too. They click create a CFT pipeline and ask them, hey, what are you building? I need a new RDS, and it walks them all through all the process. That's stuff, instance name and stuff like that. And they automatically get a build pipeline. We do also have just a basic one. I don't list EC2 here because we don't have that in a drop down. They get a base pipeline, a base CFT, and they can fill that out with really whatever infrastructure they need to request. And then we have, I didn't put the button here, but we also have a security scanning process in there to add new images from Docker Hub. Anything that we put into our repository has to be security scanned first. We're going to make sure that there are no critical vulnerabilities, so we provide that option through the portal. They essentially say, I want to import this image, this version. It'll go out, pull it, scan it, and push it out to DTR. And if for some reason it doesn't pass, it'll tell them why. Not pushing this button hard enough. And adding new technologies. It's really easy. Like I mentioned, I can throw in a new base image really quickly. Okay, so when the developers come and ask us for stuff, we can put it in there. So automated configuration. Remember earlier I talked about meetings and meetings and meetings. We didn't want to have to do that anymore. So now we push the default Jenkins file right to the application repo. This is awesome because this way, we have scripted pipelines. We don't want the users to have to really know how to code a Jenkins file. We provide them with a Jenkins file that'll do a build, it'll store the artifact, it'll create an image, it'll push that into the repository, and then it'll deploy to a non-prod environment. So it does everything they need to do to at least get them into non-prod right away, without knowing anything about Jenkins, about Docker, anything like that. So we push what we call an application topology file out to their repo as well. We call it the Fusion file. And what this lists is it lists the technology they're using, so Node.js. It lists the port that the application is going to be listening on and stuff like that. And what we do is we take that file and we generate a compose file for them. That way they don't have to know anything about Docker. They don't have to know anything about the networking involved with deploying their application out. They just really need to know about their application, and then our process will create that compose for them. Cool thing, though, is they don't have to use it. We also allow the developer to bring their own compose. So if they have some specialized needs, they have different ports, different networks they want to handle, they can bring that too. We create the build job. They don't have to go in, hit new job, pipeline, tell where their Jenkins file and stuff like that. We create it all for them, point it at the repo. They don't have to worry about that. We also add hooks to the Bitbucket repo. So when they push out into Bitbucket, it's going to kick off that job automatically. Okay, they don't have to hit go. Essentially, they never have to go to Jenkins if they don't want to, assuming their code builds. And if it doesn't, that's kind of not my problem at that point. And then we also configure the branch permissions in Bitbucket. So of course, no pushing directly to master, no pushing directly to develop, approvals on all pull requests, all that fun stuff. The idea being we want them to use good practices in order to get out there, so we just configure their repo for them with all that stuff. So when this process is done, it's a fully automated pipeline. It's ready to rock. All they have to do is start delivering code, and their application is going to show up in a non-prod environment. Developer empowerment. This is a really big deal to us. We really wanted the developers to be able to innovate, to be able to try new stuff, and so we gave them that ability. All of our pipelines, we use a common shared library. My team has created myriad functions, helper functions that allow the developers to do stuff. I mentioned earlier compliance, so these things hit the compliance gates. Stuff like storing artifacts in Artifactory. They don't really want to know how to do that. They just call the little Artifactory store, give the location of their artifact, and it does it for them. And of course, that's all coded into the default Jenkins file. Our global library is open source, okay? We don't hide any of this. We didn't want it to be any kind of black box. If the developers wanted to go and see what we're doing, they can. They can go and check it out. And that allows them to update their pipeline configuration. If they don't like what I did, they can go ahead and they can update it themselves, and they can see all the functions that are available to them. So if they want to change that flow a little bit, they want to do a build and then kind of SOAP UI test or something like that, they're able to do that really, really easily. So that allows them to innovate. That allows them to do some new stuff. So we've seen some really complex pipelines come out of developers just messing around, just seeing what they can do. When they do something really cool, though, I like to make it available to all my users. Like I say, I got 2,500 users. I don't have a lock on all the good ideas. I'm pretty smart, but I don't know everything. So when we have a developer who comes up with a really neat process, we want to make that available to everybody. So what usually what happens is someone puts a process in place in their pipeline, and then they'll come to us and say, hey, check this out. We did this really neat thing. We'll take a look and we'll be, hey, that's really great for our users. We're going to pull that into our central library so we can make it available for everybody. So this allows us to make this pipeline better, quicker. I mentioned, we're a small team. At this point, I've got 7 people working on this project. It's not a lot to support that many users. So when a group, a dev team, comes up with their own functionality and they want to make it available to everyone, we do that PR, get it right in there. It allows us to make our pipelines better, quicker than we could do on our own. So with this process, the developers own the whole cycle. They own the application from code all the way into prod. It allows them to do a lot of different things. It gives them a ton of power to be able to do what they want. Of course, it's a lot of rope. We give them a lot of rope. They do have the ability to kind of mess themselves up. And when that happens, they're going to call us. They're going to say, hey, my pipeline isn't working, and we're going to do our best to help them out. But at the end of the day, they own that process. So this is a really important part of how this works. Now, I mentioned the UI at the beginning there. That's really neat. It moves them all through. But we didn't build the functionality into the UI. All the UI does is call services underneath, and we have a whole API layer that handles all this stuff. First of all, it abstracts the tools from the process. I mentioned we have Bitbucket, we have Refactoring, we have Docker, all that fun stuff. We don't necessarily want to be tied down to a particular tool, but if we change tools, we don't want to have to update our UI. So we have that API layer in the middle. If we change a tool, we update that API layer, but we don't change the interface. So we don't have to worry about having to update the UI to make new calls and all that stuff. It also provides elevated access where it's necessary. So our users don't have the ability to create their own repos. There's, some organizational reasons why they're not allowed to do that. So they can create a repo through the portal. And this allows them to do that without having the admin privileges or whatnot that's necessary to do that. It's multiple languages. Already, we created a lot of these services over time. So, I've created a few in Python. We got other guys who are really good with Node. I'm not very good with Node, so I typically hit Python. It doesn't really matter what that service is written in. We have Java processes at this point as well. So it doesn't really matter. And you remember earlier I mentioned, Bitbucket repos, and we would only present the repos that a user had access to. This is how we do it. When the UI renders that page, it hits one of our APIs, goes out to Bitbucket, checks the user access, and only presents what they have access to. And we use a bunch of different APIs to do that kind of stuff in the background. And this is really the really important one. It enables specialized portals to be created. So, as I said, I don't have a lock on all the good ideas. And we have some teams doing some really innovative stuff, some really groundbreaking stuff. But their pipelines are a lot different than what the default pipeline would be. We have one, it's based around all that Netflix Gradle processes and stuff like that. They don't have to ask all the questions that we usually do because they know how it's going to build. They essentially only have to know, hey, what's it called and where do you want to put it? So we allow them to create specialized portals, but they're able to hit our API layer. So all they really have to do is create their front end and their default Jenkins file, and they're able to use our API layer to do that. So app team comes up, they want to create a new portal. Awesome. They can just tie into our API layer, which hits all the back-end stuff, and they only have to really worry about their front end. Another app team comes up, they can do the same thing. We've multiple teams doing this now. So I've got my big portal, and we've got several others that are using our back end. It's also going to allow us to migrate. We're on really the third iteration of this portal. The first one was rudimentary, static HTML. It wasn't very nice. It wasn't very pretty. Our next one, also not very nice. Our current one, I like it. It's nice, the JavaScript, it's pretty and stuff like that. But I guarantee you within the next 3 to 6 months, we're going to be on a different portal. There are different UIs already within the company that we might tie into. The nice thing about it, though, is we got this back end that we can tie into, so I don't really have to worry about having to recreate any of those processes. Just got to get those selections available in this new UI, and we're ready to go. It really simplifies that adoption. So the result, no roadblocks. They don't have to talk to a central team for a build process. They don't have to talk to me. I haven't locked down the process. That's nice. Saves me time, saves them time. They don't have to worry about infrastructure. Since they're deploying out into Docker, it said they don't have to worry about provisioning boxes and stuff like that. They also don't have to worry about setting up new RDS instances, any kind of new AWS infrastructure. You do that all through the pipeline without request to anybody. No tickets, no meetings, no waiting. With no central teams involved, they don't have to worry about my workload. They don't have to worry about hosting's workload. They don't have to wait. They don't have to tell me anything. They can just move right through. We still have to do change control. Neat thing is now the pipeline handles that for them. It's going to open a standard change ticket. It's going to say, hey, I'm deploying this application at this particular time. Of course, that particular time is literally right now. It opens that ticket, it does the deploy, it updates the ticket with the result, and then closes it. So no one has to worry about this complicated change request process. And then the one, I'm going to call it a speed bump instead of a roadblock. The deploy to production, I've said several times, they're presented with a pipeline that'll get them out into non-prod really easily. Production's a slightly different story. We talked with the compliance folks, and they're still really big on separation of duties. Whether or not I agree with that, I still have to make it happen. So everybody who deploys to production only goes through one job, and that's a job I control. And when I say I mean my team. That job will make sure that whatever they're doing will hit the compliance steps that they need to do. So that makes sure that their artifacts in Artifactory, make sure their image is in DTR, make sure that they've deployed to non-prod before they're deploying to prod. Also make sure that it's been approved. Somebody somewhere said this is good to go. And then that job can only be run by product owners and managers. Can't have a developer putting their stuff all the way through the pipeline without at least talking to somebody else. So this whole process reduces that time to market because no longer do they have to talk to anybody. They can just make stuff happen by going through this simple wizard process. Look at that. I keep talking over my own bullets. So now we've got an open road. There's no more roadblocks. But notice this road, it has some guardrails. I still got to keep these guys on the road. They're not allowed to drive off into the wild blue yonder and just do whatever they want. We got to make sure they're not going to destabilize our system. I mentioned earlier the bring your own compose. We check that compose file to make sure they're not requesting 400 CPUs and 2 terabytes of memory. All right, we don't want them to take down our DDC cluster. We make sure that they're not using ports that they shouldn't be using. My team actually took down one of our clusters by using the wrong port. Hey, we added some checking after that to make sure we never did that again and no other developers did. So it's an open road. The developers can keep on going at all speed and just get stuff done, do what they do, which is develop great applications, providing great functionality to our users. Look at that, I talked really, really fast. I still have 18 minutes to go. I hope you guys have questions. So recap, where we were. Hey, we were compliant. That's what we built, and we're still compliant. Still have to be compliant. Months and months of talks with compliance people to make sure we're compliant. Meetings. If there's one thing Liberty Mutual does well, it's meetings. We're really, really good at sitting in a room and talking to each other. So no meetings, all right? We're going to cut back on those meetings. Multiple forms. Forms for infrastructure, forms for configuration, forms for deployment, forms for change requests. Now we're down to one wizard process. That's it. They go through this one little process. It's all controlled by them. They don't have to wait on any of it. Black box. Developers could not see what was happening. They had no idea how this entire process worked. And now it's all open source. They can see how all this is working. They can see the functions that are created. They even have the ability to update them. Rigid control by a central team. This is my favorite one that we got rid of because I was that central team. We had 3 guys at that point working on this. Frankly, people didn't like us very much. All right, we had a lockdown process. We were pretty slow to update because we had a bunch of people calling us. Why did my build break and all this fun stuff? That was no fun at all. So now it's all developer controlled. When their build breaks, it's really on them to figure out what went wrong, and they can fix it because they created it. It really puts all the power in their hands. Difficult to extend. New technologies, very hard to do. New processes, very hard to do. Now it's wicked easy, all right? All we got to do is add in a new global pipeline function, or a shared library function, or the developer can just create it themselves right in their Jenkins file. It's really, really, really easy to update. So 2 to 3 months. You remember my little flashy thing? That was my favorite animation. 2 to 3 months it used to take to get an application in. Now it's minutes. All right, if I have a fully coded application right now, I could have it out there by this afternoon, or, well, it's already afternoon. We'll call it tomorrow morning. Okay, it's all it takes. Just takes a few minutes to get things out there. I'm gonna put the Fusion logo back up there because I'm really proud of it. I like it a lot. So, portals. It makes it really easy to get our users out there, and I would really encourage people to try it out. When you have so many users trying to do so many cool things, you don't want them to necessarily have to know Jenkins. You don't want them to have to know Docker. You don't want them to have to know they have to put things in Artifactory. You just want it to happen for them so that they can do what they do best, which is develop excellent applications. And using stuff like this, they're able to do it. So that's it. I am on to questions, and not a single person stopped me for questions. I'm very disappointed in you guys. Does anybody have questions? Yes, ma'am. How do you update the Jenkins file? Well, the Jenkins file is put right into their repo. Okay, it lives with their application code, so they're able to just update it whenever they want. It's available to them. I never touch their Jenkins file. Once it's in their repo, they own it. If I want to update the pipeline process, I update that in the shared library. Okay, and I do my best not to change the interface with that library so that they can just keep on running their Jenkins file while in the background it might be doing something a little bit different. Maybe putting something in a different place, running an additional check or something like that. We've done that several times. We started out with creating Docker images, but we weren't doing any scanning on them. So when we had an and this was when we were really new in the process, and when an available security tool, when a security tool was made available to us, we just added that scan in the background. Users never even saw it, but now that functionality was available to them without having to do anything at all. What if it's something we don't support? Well, that's why they have control over their own Jenkins file. Okay, they can create essentially whatever they want it to do. Okay, now if it's something like they want to use a new tool that might not be available on the slaves, now that's a point where they do have to engage me. Okay, because we have about 40 different slaves. Right now we're running CJE. We have a lot of static slaves. We're getting away from that very, very quickly. In fact, these two nice ladies right here are going to be at my company next week to talk to us about how we're going to get core running and making that a lot easier. So if they have to add new tools, yeah, they have to engage me because our team owns the platform. That's what we do. We keep the platform running well. So when new tools come out, yeah, we do have to add that out there for them. Yes, sir.
So I was talking with a manager a couple weeks ago about helping his team pacify by using DevOps because they're not doing much in the pipeline. His response to me was, well, help me out with our compliance roadblocks first, and then we'll talk about DevOps.
I'm sorry, I missed a little bit of that.
So I guess the question is, how did you bring your compliance folks up to speed on efficiently doing their audits using the new technology artifact, looking at the logs?
Yeah. Okay, so the question is how do we get our compliance folks on board, essentially? How do we provide them with what they need?
And educate them on how they can efficiently get what they need versus manual on the developer side.
Right, okay, and how they could do their job efficiently. So the first thing we did is we have one of our principal developers on our team spent 3 straight months talking with our compliance folks. This screen is not big enough to show the flow that is necessary for compliance. The thing is massive, absolutely massive. Essentially, they said, we're like, hey, do you want this log? Yeah, we'd like that log. Do you want this log? Yeah, we'd like that log. I'm like, are there any logs you don't want? No. Okay, good enough. We'll give it all. So we push all our stuff into the enterprise logging system, Splunk, and they're able to search that. As far as, so that's where all our Jenkins logs go and stuff like that. As far as, I want to check the hash on that repo. I want to make sure that that's right. I've created a couple scripts for them with Jenkins jobs that'll show them all that stuff. So like, I want to know this build number. What it'll do is it'll go and pull all the change requests that were associated with that. We're kind of improving that process as we go. We'll get a call from the auditing people and they say they want X, Y, Z, and we really don't have an automated way to get that for them. They're still learning this process honestly, as much as we are. All right, so that's the kind of thing that we're going to slowly improve. I'll do you, then you. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so how do you manage documentation? Do you automate it somehow?
How do we manage documentation around the pipeline?
Yeah, which is typically required by compliance.
I didn't catch that last.
Like compliance teams typically require documentation when you're building new version of application.
Yeah.
You deploy it, you intentionally requirements.
Yeah. Okay, so the question is how do we manage documentation for compliance and stuff like that? So I mentioned earlier stuff like the repo configuration. We build right into that. We tell them they have to have a JIRA ticket number before they do any kind of commit. And that kind of ties every single code commit to what amounts to a ticket. It says, I'm doing this for that. Okay, as far as requirements, like I've got a new app and I want to list requirements and stuff like that, The real blunt answer is I don't care. Okay, I provide the platform for them. Okay, and I provide all the steps associated with building and deploying that allows them to say that this particular build of this code is here. You can see all this code, here's the artifact, here's the image. As far as what happens before they do that, it's kind of on them. This is where the developer empowerment comes. I'm not a creator of policy. I'm an implementer of policy when I'm told we have to do this. Everybody has to do this. So I build that into the pipeline when I'm told. But I don't create that stuff on my own. I'm not qualified. Well, I'm qualified, I'm just not empowered. Let's put it that way. And if I put that in place, what's going to happen is I'm going to have 2,500 developers on my case for why am I slowing them down? Okay, so I want high-level support when that stuff comes in. So we have directors tell us we need to do this. I put it in place. If I'm not told we need that, I don't. I think that gentleman back there had a question first.
Does this support AWS only
Right now, yes. Okay, we're pushing out into Azure about 15 minutes, it feels like. We've been talking about it for a while. We are working on Azure very, very soon, and when that happens, we're going to add whole different selections to our UI to allow them to get out there fast, creating Terraform pipelines for them, and then deploying out there. And we haven't ironed all that stuff out. I mean, one of my first meetings on Monday is going to be to talk about our epics and our features that we're going to have to hit to get out into Azure. But Azure's going to be next, and we essentially can integrate with whatever the architects come up with next. Yes, sir.
I want one of these.
You want one of these?
Do I download it?
Yeah. So the
Alternatively, if it's hard for me to justify a dozen engineers with a range of expertise, how do I make it happen for my company?
so how do you put it? How do you put it in place easily? That's kind of what you're asking me, right? So chances are you probably, I mean, if you're using pipelines and stuff like that, you probably already have a lot of this stuff. And we were talking earlier, you mentioned, you have so good feed, I like it. You have your own shared libraries already and stuff like that. And, you can create a default process, and it's pretty easy to just put a relatively easy static page out in front. The original implementation, all it was a static HTML page. It was really, really ugly. A couple of easy services. At the time, we were using a different SCM that was not fun, okay, but we had to put a couple services in front of that, and then all it did was called into a Jenkins job, and the Jenkins job created everything in the background for them. I like Jenkins. I do a lot of automation work with it. I know that probably comes as a huge surprise as I stand here in front of the Jenkins World logo. So that was it. I mean, it took, the original POC took 4 people, 2 days. And it was working. It was functional in 2 days. It's really, really easy to set up once you just have an idea of what you want that standard pipeline to look like. So you can't download it. You'll notice I didn't put a lot of details in there about technologies and stuff like that. I didn't do a demo. 2 reasons. I'm not sure they would want me to do that. And at some point in the past life, I've angered the demo gods so badly that they never go right. They literally never work. So I wasn't gonna put you guys or myself through that kind of torture. So, yes, sir. What is my what? What is the team name? We're the Fusion team. Yeah, that's what our platform is called. So we call ourselves the Fusion team. It's really, we branded it. And I spend a lot of my time talking with our user base and talking with potential users. I do a lot of roadshows and stuff like that, go down to our Boston offices. We have offices all over New England, really. And I go around and I talk about it and I try to get them on our platform. Any other questions, guys? Oh, we got one way in the back. Yes, sir. Good question. It's all scripted. Okay, we started writing a lot of this stuff a couple years ago. At the time, scripted was kind of the thing. So we started writing it. It was all scripted out. We are working on refactoring. I've been talking about this a little bit this weekend, or this week. We're just starting to refactor some of our stuff. I mentioned, it took us a couple of days, a few people to get things running. We did a lot of date-driven development. So we've ended up with some really big hero methods, do a whole bunch of stuff in the background. The dude who wrote that stuff, he was kind of a scripter at the time. I don't know that guy, but he was about this tall and had a beard. And boy, I'll tell you what, he created some really wacky stuff. So we're going to keep on going with scripted, and we're going to refactor a lot of that code to make it a lot more modular, so we can make we can make it even easier for the developers to update their code and update their pipeline process. Yes, sir.
So you kind of make a culture shift from you owning the process to pushing it on to developers.
Yep.
Did you have any teams that tried to push back and say, we don't want to own that, we want you to continue owning that?
Yeah. So the question.
How did you find some of those battles?
So the question is that, you know, we've pushed a lot of responsibility back on the developers, and did we have anybody push back on that? So yes, we've had some people push back. Frankly, though, this whole innovation, this whole process is being pushed from the top down. Okay, I don't have to tell them they have to use it because somebody else is telling them they have to do this. Also, if they want to get on Docker out in AWS and they want this quick release process, they're going to have to do it this way. Okay, which means they're going to have to own it. There is no central team to keep track of their applications. There's only central teams to keep track of the platform. If they want to get out there quickly and they want to do this innovation, they have to own the process. They just don't have a choice. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Excuse me? No. No, the question is, do we have any plans on open sourcing it? I'm going to say right now, definitely not. We haven't really even discussed that. Whether or not that would happen in the future, I don't know. That's a solid I don't know. Any other questions, guys? I got 3.5 more minutes. I can do a little dance or something. Actually, I'm a terrible dancer, so I'm not going to do that. I really appreciate you guys coming out. Oh, yes, ma'am. Oh, that's a wicked good question. That's a great question. The question was, so we have these shared libraries that all these applications are relying on for their builds. How do we test them? So originally, we didn't. Oh my God, what a terrible decision that was. So what we started doing, we have a couple different things. We've actually created unit tests around a lot of our code. We used Spock to do a lot of different unit testing on the code itself. And we also created not a massive, but we created a whole regression suite. Okay, so if I do a PR into develop from a feature branch, it's immediately going to kick off a whole host of jobs. It tests every single application technology we support. It tests a bunch of different key features that we want to make sure works, stuff like configuration management and stuff like that. And then essentially we can't do that merge unless every single one of those builds pass. Every once in a while, we still screw ourselves up. Okay, we add a new functionality and add it to our regression test. As soon as we get bit by that, we're like, we update our regression test to make sure we catch it next time. So it's those regression tests that really keep us honest. They've been invaluable. They test across all our masters, because sometimes we add plugin dependencies. And you know, with several different masters, honestly, we don't keep them all exactly the same. That's kind of on us. We're still working on some of that process. When we go to core, that's going to be a lot easier. So we make sure we test on every single master as well as every single application. They are. The question, are they actual Jenkins pipelines? They are. Every single one of them deploys some kind of sample application. So it deploys a sample node, sample Ruby, a bunch of different applications to make sure every single one works. And it makes sure they come up, checks to make sure they're there, everything's great, and it pushes on, it'll allow the merge from there. Any other questions, guys? I'm down to 1:15. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What kind of framework do you use, if any? And do you care about visual regression testing?
First question was, what framework is it? I'm going to be really honest, I didn't write it. I'm not a UI guy. I think it's React, but I'm not positive. I'd have to ask the guy who sits behind me, but he ain't here right now. So I believe it's React. And the other question was, do I care about visual regression? So when we update the UI, are we doing some testing there? The awesome answer is, do I care? Yes. Am I doing it? No. No, we're not. Like I said, we are looking to migrate We've been kind of in a holding pattern for a little while because we want to put a new one in place. So we haven't been doing a lot of updates to our current portal. Not going to say that hasn't bit us a couple of times, but we update it real quick and we get it out there. The funny thing, our portal runs on the same platform as all the other applications. So it's really easy for us to get new functionality out there or bug fixes as quickly as possible. Ooh, 1 second. All right, guys. I really appreciate you. You know what? I'll talk to you right afterwards. I appreciate you guys coming out. I was a little worried with the last, the last presentation of the day. I was hoping at least I'd get 3 or 4 people. So I really appreciate everyone coming out. If you have any other questions, I'll be just hanging around. So thanks a lot.